So the book starts with this lone turtle talking to someone off frame. As he crosses the river into the city, he jumps the wall, gets into the city. And it's when he gets in here that things start getting interesting. He walks through some alleys and then he sees a giant crowd of people and he's like, crap. And this is when we see the voices that are talking to him are his deceased brothers, and they are standing right behind him in spirit form, or maybe they're just voices in his head, but they are manifesting themselves in some type of visual way, and they're standing behind him, and they're all grayed out. You can't see which turtle's which. And our main turtle says, I'm just trying to get from here to there, and he points at that building in the center of the city that a lot of you guys in the comment section have said looks a lot like Shredder's helmet, but he wants to get there as quick as possible. At least you get the sense he does. And so he steals someone's motorcycle and takes off. Now this is where we get kind of a big setup for the end of the book, and at first I just thought it was just a fun little Easter egg. You get this guy that comes out of like one of the stores or something, and they're walking towards the motorcycles, and he says, check it out, Jones, some fool jacked your wheels. And you see this girl and she's upset. She's like, what the hell? Where the hell did my bike go? And I thought, oh, Jones, this is probably Casey Jones's daughter. At first I thought it was just like a fun little Easter egg thing, like maybe we were going to see other characters with similar names to other characters throughout the book, but she actually plays a bigger part later. Anyways, the turtle takes off in the motorcycle, not very stealthy. He's just going really fast. He's just getting to where he needs to get. It doesn't matter if he's seen or not, he is going to get to his destination. As you can tell by the next part, where he uses the motorcycle to blow up a fuel truck that blasts him higher up to a level that he needs to get in to this facility. So much attention is drawn to him at this point that there's no turning back now. He makes his way in, but an alarm goes off, and this is when we see those foot robot things come after our main character, and he starts throwing smoke bombs and making a break for it. He's able to get the jump on one of them, and he kind of just beats the crap out of it. And it looks like it's over, but it gets up like a zombie and it starts coming back at him. And he's like, whoa. He even says this Robo Ninja Cop's tougher than it looks. And so he goes even harder on it, pretty much decapitating it. The head goes flying off. But when it lands, our character notices that the part where the eye is got broken, and you can see that there's a human eye there. And you can see that the spirit of his brothers or the manifestations or whatever start talking like, hey, is that a human eye right there that we're looking at? And one of them says, looks like some kind of a cyborg. I think more synthetic than human. And they start like talking with each other like, a synthetic ninja? What's going on here? I got the sense that they were growing their own ninjas, like some type of a cloning farm or something. But we don't know yet. More of these robo ninjas start rolling up. He decapitates a couple of them. He's doing this as he's running away from all these robo ninjas, and he's taking them out in the process. Then he jumps from like a moving train thing onto a bunch of flying cars. It's kind of like how Anakin does in the prequels. He lands on one that's being flown by more robo ninjas. He throws them out, but the controls are jammed, so this car is just kind of flying aimlessly through the air, and the thing smashes and explodes as he jumps off of it. But this has caused so much disturbance at this point that it has gotten to the top, to the main person, the main bad guy. And we get a first look at our main villain of the series, Oroku Hiroto, as our Ronin character calls him, the so-called master of the Foot Clan and Karai's bastard son, the Shredder's grandson. I thought it was kind of strange that they emphasized so much that he's Karai's bastard son, so maybe the father is another important character. That's something to kind of keep your eye on. Maybe Karai hooked up with Casey Jones at one point. I know it's not in continuation with like the old Mirage comics, but there was that weird time in like in the later Mirage comics where Casey stayed the night at Karai's and really didn't know what happened the night before. Maybe they got inspired by that. They did say they were going to largely lean on the Mirage comics. Maybe this is one of those things. Anyways, we don't know if this guy can fight yet. He seems to be very protected by layers of security, but he is cold-blooded, as he says he wants this operation of catching this guy to be broadcast to the entire city, the pursuit, the capture, and the execution, to kind of set an example. It's in this sequence that we get mention of the bottom district, which I imagine would be where all the outcasts live that don't like fit in with the city and stuff. I believe this bottom district is going to play a big factor in the story. I'm pretty sure it's where our turtle is at the end of the book. So it looks like our turtle gets closer to like the main entrance of the facility now. But one of his spirit brothers says, I think you just ran out of miracles, bro. As you can just see, there's so much personnel there. And then as that spirit brother continues his line, we see that it's in a red dialogue box, totally indicating that this is Raphael talking to our turtle. And he says, we've been in tough spots before, but that's practically impossible. At this moment, I knew Raphael was dead. He's one of the dead brothers. And it kind of confirmed to me also who the Ronin was. Anyways, you do see the line uttered, same as it ever was, right after this. I wonder if it was on purpose. Anyhow, the turtle latches on to the bottom of a car as it flies into the facility and hides behind some crates. And he pretty much does a direct attack because he thinks they're not going to expect it. If you hadn't got the feeling up until this point, this is definitely when you got the feeling that this turtle is going for broke. My only question was, why now? What happened that all of a sudden had this turtle go, okay, now I'm going to attack? Oroku Hiroto says at one point, how the hell was he even alive to commence such idiocy? I wiped those dreadful things from the face of the earth a decade ago. So what has this turtle been doing for 10 years? Was it just hiding out, coming up with this plan? Which it doesn't really seem like he has one. He's just kind of going for it. Or were all four of them dead and he somehow, maybe through the mutagen, came back from the dead and is going out to kill them for what they did to his family? There's a rich backstory here that I hope we get to hear. This is when the big fight starts with all of these robots and he's fighting all of them at once, flying through the air, kicking them in the face, throwing grenades, blowing all of them up. Then some start coming out that have like upgrades. They have like these little jetpacks and wings or blades, and he indicates that it moves faster than the others. And this next part is where I started kind of getting indication of, I wonder if Shredder's grandson can fight, because our Ronin says, more toys, Hiroto? Machines do all your fighting for you? Gutless. I can't wait to meet you. I mean, maybe he can fight. Maybe we'll see him in like the armor, the Shredder armor and stuff, and he'll fight our main character. But what if he's never fought in his life and he's just ran this empire with all the security this whole time? The Ronin points at one of the security cameras and says, I'm coming for you, coward, and I know you're scared. This is when Hiroto sees that it's a mutant turtle, and he sends all available foot to deal with him. And he even says at one point, I thought I'd killed off you pathetic mutants before. A mistake I will not make twice. So a little glimpse into the backstory there. Anyways, there's the regular robot ninjas, and then there's the elite ninjas, just like with the regular Foot Clan before they were robots. And this is when the Ronin says, I must be getting close. And that was these characters that we saw in the trailer there that had the different faces. I thought they looked like clown faces, but yeah, that's them. And the Ronin just kind of goes through them so easy. He's going through all of these robots like a hot knife through butter. It's not even a challenge. He is just straight ripping through them. And you can see Hiroto freaking out. He's like, activate the Stockman tech. Yeah, as in Baxter Stockman technology. And this is when some mousers start coming out of the wall, and they're flying mousers. The mousers definitely look different. They don't look like the regular mousers. They almost look like little like pugs or something. And our character, it looks like he like smacks his tonfas together to create an EMP, which kind of disables the little mousers. But there's this giant like berserker mouser that's running at him, and so he pulls out the katana for that one, but the momentum is too much and it just launches the two of them out of the window of this high-rise building. And this is where you start getting like that sinking feeling, like everything this character has just gone through is all melting away. All the progression, all the hard work to try to get to the top and get to Hiroto is all melting away. And you kind of think like, oh, maybe he'll use a grappling hook just to kind of get away from the situation. Or he'll land on an awning or in a pile of trash and just kind of roll away and figure it out tomorrow. Nope, he smacks straight into the concrete. He says everything feels broken and he is just coughing up blood profusely. And all the citizens are just kind of gathering around him like, what the hell just happened? And we see that the robot foot are kind of trying to get to the situation, trying to move through the crowd, and they confront the same group of people that we saw at the beginning that was with that Jones girl whose bike got stolen, and she says, oh, he went off that way, kind of misdirecting them, sending them in a different direction. And she notices that the turtle actually went down a sewer and there's just blood leading up to the sewer. Now, we as an audience, we're now in the sewer and we're following the turtle, and he is just coughing up more and more blood. And this is when our turtle takes off his gear and we actually see him just as a turtle, and I love the way he looks here. I thought he looked so sick in this part. And just with like the blood coughing, just seeing like your hero this way, like at the very bottom, I love to see stuff like this. I think it makes for a great story. And this is when it got really sad because he knows he's dying and he starts taking out all the different turtle weapons and laying them on the ground. And then he takes out the 4 Ninja Turtle bandanas, the blue, the red, the orange, the purple, and he lays them all down on top of the weapons. And he just says to himself, we were always so different, so much alike. I miss my brothers so much, and I miss my father. And you see the turtle pull out this book that was probably Splinter's book, and then he says, more than anything else, I wanted to make him proud. And then he grabs Leonardo's broken sword and puts it up to his stomach as he is about to perform seppuku. But there's too much blood in his throat and he starts to collapse, and you can see him saying, no, not yet, not like this, as he goes down. And this is when that Jones girl just kind of walks in on him and she's like, holy crap, no way, you're a mutant turtle. Almost like she's heard of them before, maybe by her dad, but it's definitely a little different than the old comics because she knew who the turtles were. She would have known which turtle this was, the way April does at the end. So it looks like they're going down a different route in this aspect. But anyways, the turtle flatlines. You can see that he flatlines, and you kind of get the idea he kind of goes into the afterlife, and all his brothers are there and they're all happy that he's waking up, and they're in the old sewer lair, and there's just this heavenly glow to everything, and you can tell by the turtle belts which turtle this is not. But just as the Ronin starts asking them questions, he starts to wake up and sees an older, weathered April O'Neil standing at his bedside as he's hooked up to all these medical machines. And he can't believe it. He's like, April, is that really you? And she's like, yeah, it's me. And then the biggest line of the whole book is at the very end where she says, who are you just talking to, Michelangelo? And so it was confirmed that the last Ronin is Michelangelo. So the story starts off just like the 5-page preview that was released to the public, and that has April O'Neil, now in the future, older, laying down in bed, staring up at the ceiling, thinking about something. You can see tears are coming out of her eyes. As we remember, the preview kept going with now a flashback of her and Casey Jones talking to each other, and it looked like Casey had just proposed to her and they were about to have a big dinner, letting the turtles know that they were going to get married, when all of a sudden Raph runs into the room covered in blood and clears the dinner table, and we saw Michelangelo and Donatello dragging in a bloodied Splinter who is like semi-conscious, and they threw him up on the table. April indicates that what they're seeing is bad, that they need to focus on what wounds are the most dangerous. And this is a brutal opening to the comic. You just see a bunch of blood everywhere, and Casey and April are trying to figure out what happened. I like the way this one starts off with a bang like this. Although, as I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, there are some moments where this one breathes a little bit, and we'll get to that in a second. But Mikey explains to Casey and April that a large Foot Clan strike team jumped them as they came out of the sewers. This scene just seems like really chaotic. There's a bunch of things going on at the same time. You even hear Splinter mutter out a word. He says Leonardo, but he barely gets it out. And it's just fitting for the character of Splinter to just be thinking of his sons even as he's dying. And yeah, Splinter's just worried because everybody's there except for Leonardo. Mikey gets in close with Splinter, holding his hand, and just tells him Leonardo was the rear guard, making sure everybody got clear. And you just see the look on Mikey's face. He just looks so sad. I can almost hear him delivering this dialogue here. I love the way they drew this one. I think these flashbacks were drawn by Ben Bishop. And I think the future stuff, the present day stuff, was drawn by the Escorza brothers. And we'll get to that in a minute here. Casey just snaps and he says, screw that. Come on, Raphael, let's go make sure Leo got clear. And as we can tell from the character of Casey up until this point, and we've only gotten a little bit of him so far, but it seems like he had cleaned up his act. He's cut his long hair, he's wearing a tie, and he's settling down. But it seems like this brings out the old Casey in him. And it's right here where Raph says, damn straight, it's body count time. A nice nod to the old body count comic. Now, this is where the preview ended, where Raphael says they're going to find out how big of a mistake they made. A voice comes in from out of frame and it says, stand down, Raph. And as we predicted, it's Leonardo entering the room. And he looks cool. They got him wearing a big trench coat. He's got the 2 crossed diagonal belts that go across his chest. This was probably my favorite part of the comic. The way they wrote Leo here and the way he conducts himself, he goes straight into like leader mode. He starts giving an update on what happened, saying that they're good for now and that the rest of the foot might be running towards the east side, the docks maybe. This is when Raphael says, "What about the truce, Leo? I thought we got past all this with them." And this reminded me of the end of the old Mirage Volume 1 comics when they make the truce with Karai and the Foot Clan at the end of City at War. I feel like this is why they were saying stuff like this heavily leans on the Mirage universe, or it was largely inspired by those turtles, is probably things like that. We're probably going to see or hear more things about the past that the Mirage Turtles went through that'll make us be like, oh yeah, I remember when the Mirage Turtles did that. But at the same time, this is sort of its own thing. So yeah, I would expect more things like that in the upcoming issues. Now, it's not explained why the truce was broken. Leo just says, "I'm honestly surprised it lasted as long as it did." And then we even hear Splinter get out another few words as he says, "This war, just matter of time. Oroku against Hamato, always. Karai trying to end it once and for all." And that's when everybody starts looking around the room and notices Raph's gone. We jump back to the present or the future, and we see that April is getting out of bed, and she is missing a leg and she is missing an arm. She's gone through something, and we get clues later on that it was a part of this attack. We see her putting on a robotic arm, and then as she's trying to put on her robotic leg, she accidentally drops it, and she yells out, "Hey Casey, a little help here?" And we see Casey Jones's mask and hockey sticks sitting in the corner, but we don't actually get to see Casey. We actually end up seeing somebody else. But before we get to that, it cuts to Michelangelo, or the last Ronin, in the kitchen, and he looks like he's up and about now. He just has some bandages on him, but he's up and about, and he's lighting up the stove to boil up some tea. And we look over at the table and we see the ghosts of his 3 dead brothers sitting there talking to him. And this is probably the most detailed drawing we've gotten of all the turtles together from the Escorza brothers, and they look cool. And I don't know how they pulled it off. Maybe it's because we're doing time jumps, but all the different art styles from like the other artists at the flashbacks and then these artists here in the present, they all seem to flow pretty good together. It's not too jarring. And this is where we get a clue of what might have happened to April. You hear one of the brothers say, "This whole April still being alive thing is nuts, huh?" And then Leonardo says, "Yeah, hard to believe anyone survived that." Michelangelo says, "The last thing I remember was the explosion," and then he proceeds to blow out a match. So I'm assuming he got caught up in the blast somehow, and he says he was out of it pretty bad, and that when he finally came to, he couldn't remember anything for days. Then Raphael, or the spirit of Raphael, tries to make light of it by saying, "I kind of missed that one, I guess." Obviously because he had ran off, how we just saw in the flashback. And then the 3 brothers, not Mikey, they all start arguing with each other about, Raphael leaving or whatnot. And Michelangelo's just sitting there hearing it all. And as the tea kettle starts whistling, it all just kind of is too much for him to take in at once, and he snaps. And he throws the tea kettle and he says, "You always make our entire life about you," talking to Raphael. He says, "I fought every battle you have, even the idiotic ones you started, and you still want to judge me. You knew what my mission was in the tower, a one-way ticket from the start, for our father, for our family, for our honor." And then it shows the table again, and the brothers are no longer there. They vanished. So to an outside person, he just looks like he's yelling at voices in his head. There's nobody there. And it just really hits right here just how alone Michelangelo is. I find it interesting what he said though earlier. He says, "You knew what my mission was in the tower, a one-way ticket from the start." When I had first read this, I thought he was talking about something in the past. I was thinking like, tower, they must like go on some type of suicide mission after Raph disappears or whatever. But I think he's talking about what he had just done in the previous issue here in the present, in the future, where he went up to Shredder's grandson's tower and fell off of it. Because he says right after this, "Look, I should be dead. The fall should have killed me, but it didn't." And we actually kind of find out why in a minute. Anyways, he says, "I'm still here, still alive to fight. I lost the battle, but the war goes on." And then you see the hands of his ghost brothers return, and they all raise a glass, and Michelangelo raises a glass back to them. And that's that image that was teased to us a few weeks back. So the story cuts back to the past at this point, and we see Raphael with rage in his eyes jumping across rooftops. He even does a pose in one of the jumps that's very similar to the pose he's doing in issue 2 of the original comics back in the day. Eventually, he jumps down into the subway. We even get a funny cameo here from Peter Laird and Kevin Eastman, who are eating a pizza, and say, "Did you see that?" Underground, Raphael finds a foot soldier. He grabs him and starts hurting him and says, "Where's Karai?" You see later that he killed him and left him on the ground. Then it cuts to the docks and we see Karai. She has a bunch of foot soldiers ready to go and she's talking to them. She says, "I gave you one simple command. Kill the mutants. The truce between the Foot and Hamato clans has been broken. Blood has been spilled." Now, they don't reveal the motivation on why blood was spilled. Did the Turtles accidentally kill somebody that was a part of the Foot, or did the Foot just all of a sudden one day decide to break the truce because they were up to something even bigger that they thought maybe the Turtles would interfere? I'm not sure if they're going to reveal that. They might just leave it vague like this. Let me know down below what you think. Anyways, you hear Raph say there's no turning back now. And he just walks into a crowd of Foot Clan and starts slicing them up. He's doing flips through the air, just stabbing people as he's flipping. It's a bloody situation. Chaos just erupts and you see Karai say, "So be it. Destroy the beast." And we actually get a good look at some elite guards here. And I like the way they look pretty cool. As Raph's fighting, you see him, he starts getting hit with spears and arrows, blood splattering everywhere, but he's also killing people as he's going. The elite guards try to come at him already as he's weakened, but he appears just to shred straight through them. They do some damage though on him. But yeah, he seems to tear through them pretty quick, and then Karai jumps down. And now Raphael's just covered in arrows and he's bloody. There's like arrows going through his leg, going through his arm, like all the way through, and he just has to fight like this. And him and Karai just start fighting. They just start going at it. I think at one point Raph gets stabbed like underneath his arm by one of her swords, but then he stabs her in the arm with one of his sai, and then they both, as they're fighting, fall off the dock and into the water. The fight continues briefly underwater, and you see Karai slip her hand down and grab a kunai that is strapped on Raphael's leg. She pulls it off, and just as Raph is about to stab her in the back with his sai, she at the same time stabs him in the neck with the knife. And it kind of looks like the type of stab that is like underneath the chin and goes up into the brain, or it could just be a stab in the neck, but either way, Raphael dies here. And the last thing he sees as he's reaching up is his sai floating away from him. Although with his other sai, he did stab Karai in the back with that one, and she, unconscious now, floats away as well. So it looks like we just got a reveal of how Karai ended up in that comatose state that she's in the present. Also, now we know how Raphael died. We jump back to the present with Michelangelo and April. April's surprised that he's up and about walking around. She says, "Michelangelo, what the heck are you doing up?" And it's a good question because he took a bad fall in the first issue, and they do address it a little bit here, how he's up and about. He says, "I'm still trying to process it all. That fall would have killed me when I was younger." And then she says, "I'm no Donatello, but it doesn't take a genius to see your mutation has progressed over the years. You're bigger, stronger, and you're healing amazingly fast." So it looks like they're playing with the idea of his mutation continuing to change him as he gets older, which was an idea that they always played around with. I believe even before they did the show The Next Mutation, they actually were going to do a movie called The Next Mutation, where the Turtles all keep mutating because of the mutagen in their system. And this was back in the 90s, so maybe this is an old idea that they've always wanted to play around with. Then April yells for Casey and yells, "Breakfast is ready." And we see that young girl walk into the room who saved Michelangelo in issue 1. So this is Casey and April's daughter, whose name is Casey Jones, named after her father, obviously. Would have been cool if they would have went with Shadow, but still we predicted that this was going to be April and Casey's daughter, and yes, that's what it is. And Mikey's kind of confused. He says, "Casey?" And she says, "Yep, that's me." And then she says, "And you're supposed to be the funny one, right?" We'll get back to her in a minute as the story in this point cuts to Shredder's grandson, Oroko Hiroto, who is training with foot soldiers in his tower. He's yelling at his foot soldiers. He says, "I said show me a decent fight. Kill me, cowards, or I will have you killed." And then they all start coming at him and he's taking them all on. The next part just shows off how evil he is as one of the foot soldiers gets a hit in on him and hits him with a stick. Everyone stops fighting and he says, "Excellent strike, almost masterful." And then he says, "Unfortunately for you, there is only one master," and he pulls out a knife and slices the guy's throat. And so the fighting lesson ends. Next we see Oroku Hiroto ask his captain for a full update. This is also another page that was teased to us weeks ago, and we saw that he tells his captain to pretty much turn the city upside down to find the last Ronin and to remember what happened to the last captain that didn't get this job done. And we see his head on a pike and crows are eating the flesh off of it. We jump back to Mikey and April, who, by the way, I don't think I mentioned it earlier, are in the Turtles' old home. It looks like April started living here after everything had gone down. Anyways, they explain to Mikey that the place in the city that they are located in is called Rock Bottom, now that New York's been split up into 3 different districts. There's top, middle, and bottom. Young Casey even says Rock Bottom is the battlefield and the rest of us underground, we're the resistance. So something's going on here that April's a part of. She even says, which we'll tell him about after he gets more rest. And she seems kind of annoyed that young Casey's kind of spilling the beans here. Anyways, young Casey takes Michelangelo on a tour of like her workout area where they have all the training equipment. And she says she's learned a lot just through old training videos and reading. So I think we're going to get to see her fight alongside the last Ronin at one point. I don't know why, I kind of get the feeling that a team is kind of going to get built around him. She takes him over to where all of the stuff that he was carrying is laid out, the old turtle weapons and then Splinter's book, which she wants to know more about. It's all in Japanese, but she doesn't understand it enough. But she does understand a little bit to know that there's special lessons and techniques in the book that she wants to learn. Then she asks the million-dollar question, where have you been all this time? He says, after all the bad stuff that happened, it was too much to handle, so I just started walking. And we jump to a flashback, but this time the flashback is drawn by Kevin Eastman, and it's all in black and white, and it looks just like the old Mirage comics. It shows Mikey walking into the mountains. It's all snowing and stuff. He even says, I'd seen photos of snow-covered mountains, but never set foot on one. And being cold-blooded, I didn't have a chance. So I found a place to meet my end. And he arrives at what looks like almost like those Japanese symbols that look like an arch with like 2 bars going across. It looks like somebody had built one there in the past and he stumbled across it just now. So I think he took it as a sign as this is a spot probably where he's gonna die. It shows him laying down. It says days, a week. He says maybe longer. He says, I don't know how long I laid there, but my mutant body would not die, and that he started hearing voices telling him that his destiny was incomplete. Now, this is interesting because this is a big development on the Turtles. Like, he's out there laying there for days, weeks, maybe longer, like you said, and he's not dying. Probably hasn't eaten. So we're finding out new things about their mutation here. Eventually, things got warmer, and then it shows him sitting there meditating. He read and reread Splinter's book, looking for some type of balance, and that he spent years alone thinking that that was where he was supposed to be. You see that he starts fishing and stuff to get food, planting crops, but one day the real world found him again. You see that some humans stumble upon him one day and they yell monster and they say freak, kill it. It looks like at first he let them beat him. He says he welcomed the pain. At least he felt something after all that time, but that then he saw the look on their faces, laughing, taking a life just to take a life for fun. No honor, and that's when he got mad. And then it shows a scene of all of them presumably dead, laying all around him, and him just standing there exhausted. And that then he realized that his destiny was on the battlefield to the end. And it shows him walking away back to civilization. It shows him turning into a savage after this, fighting a bunch of different enemies and stuff, and standing on top of all the ones he's killed, almost like in a Thunderdome type thing. And then he says, my training reached its end, and it shows him getting on a boat, which looks like an international boat, so he might have went international on this training. He says there would be no peace until he fulfilled his destiny, that it was time to come home and face it, to complete his master's mission and kill the last Oroku. Then young Casey says, good, because my crew's gonna help you. And then Mikey wants no part of it. He says no. And then she says, too bad, because I wasn't asking. Mikey gets a kick out of this because it reminds him of Casey. We finally arrive to the end of the story, which is actually quite interesting and something I wasn't expecting. It's actually quite a wild curveball that could have some crazy ramifications in the story. We just don't know what it's going to be. On the last page, we see April, and she's walking up to a safe. She opens the safe and pulls out Fugitoid's head. And so now let the speculation begin, because we don't know what's going to happen. Is Fugitoid still alive? If booted, could he become a great ally to Michelangelo? Or somebody else is conscious inside of the Fugitoid? Or does he have plans to some type of weapon that Oroku Hiroto has. We don't know. That's what we're gonna have to wait for and see, but leave your theories down below at the bottom, letting us know what you think is going to happen with this. This is probably the biggest, like, whoa, what the heck moment in the entire book. Mind if that happens. So the story starts off just like the official 5-page preview that was revealed prior to the release of the book. A flashback of Oroku Hiroto, Shredder's grandson, becoming the leader of the Foot Clan. He is 16 when this is happening. This is 10 years after Kurai's injuries and Raphael's death from the previous issue. If you notice, his shadow is in the shape of Shredder's armor. I wonder if he'll end up donning the suit at some point. Now, as we find out in the book, he takes an interesting approach to the war that the Foot is in with the Turtles, or the Hamato clan as he refers to them as. Now that he's leader of the Foot, he sends out a formal invitation for a parley that the time has come to speak of peace. Hard to tell if he's being genuine here. Could be a trap for Splinter and the Turtles, but maybe things aren't as clear as they would seem. I'm sure we'll find out. The story continues like we saw in the preview, Hiroto talking to his comatose mom in the present, and then putting out the broadcast to the city announcing martial law until the Ronin is found. It is at this moment when all hell starts breaking loose in the city. People start freaking out, the Foot start cracking down on them, and it's just chaos. Now Michelangelo, back in the den, is talking to the ghost of his dead brothers again. They're discussing how Casey Marie is going to help out in the battle, but that she's young, just 16, and that this could be dangerous for her. Michelangelo asks them, sound familiar? Referring to how old they were when they first got started. Teens raised to seek vengeance for their family. This is when Casey Marie comes in the room and tells Mikey she's gonna go above to find her crew. Mikey is worried that it's too dangerous, but she goes anyway and tells Mikey that April has something to show him. Mikey sighs and says, same as it ever was. Probably a nod to the 2003 episode, Same as It Never Was, which shows the Turtles in the dystopian future.
Are Leo and Raph with him? You kidding? Leo and Raph aren't with anybody anymore.
Next scene we get is of Michelangelo walking into April working on Fugitoid's head. If you remember from the last issue, the final page showed her pulling Fugitoid's head out of a safe. Michelangelo is shocked to see the Fugitoid. It's apparent that only the head is there, as April says it's what's left of him. And this is when we see another flashback of what happened. It starts with Fugitoid, and it's around the same time as Hiroto is becoming leader of the Foot. We see Fugitoid preparing an airship for Splinter and Donatello to go meet with Hiroto in Japan for the parley. Donatello is wearing new gear we've never seen him in before. Looks pretty cool. It's got purple accents throughout it, obviously since it's his color. Now, an interesting detail I've noticed throughout the series is he's never wearing his headband in these flashbacks. If you look back at them, he's never wearing it. I wonder if it's just a stylistic choice or if there's some sort of meaning behind it. We also see April, Casey, Mikey, Leo, and Splinter all there as well. You see Splinter talking to Leo and Mikey. Leonardo asks Splinter if he thinks the peace talks with Hiroto are legit. He says, remember what happened the last time the Foot called a truce. I believe this is a nod to the truce that they make at the end of the City at War arc from the original 80s comics. And just to be clear, I do believe these turtles are their own continuity, but as it was stated before the series came out, this story would lean on the Mirage Turtles a lot, and I believe this is a little Easter egg to those originals. Anyways, Mikey's not buying any of it. He says all Oroku's lie. Splinter tells them hopefully Hiroto's intentions are pure, that he has lost a lot as well, referring to Hiroto's mother, Kurai. But you can also see Splinter looking down, saddened by Raphael's death. It's the only time it's touched on in the book, and it's very subtle. Then he tells his sons that they will not let their guard down either. And so he and Donatello take off to Japan, turning their communications off as they leave to avoid detection. Immediately it cuts to Baxter Stockman, who is monitoring the turtles. Apparently he found a way to track the Fugitoid somehow. At the moment, it is unclear what is the dynamic between his relationship with Hiroto or the Foot, but behind them can be seen a fleet of robot Foot soldiers. At least on the surface, it appears Hiroto and Baxter are working together. Baxter is a clever individual though, so keep that in mind. You find out his intentions are to acquire Honeycutt at the moment, aka the Fugitoid. He appears to order an attack on the turtles using these robot Foot. Some human ones do seem to show up as well, as we see Leonardo slice them up later. Now forgive me if I get this next part are incorrect. A lot happens, and it happens fast. I really had to slow down and examine the scenes here, and I think I see what's going on. Before Splinter left, you can see him telling Leonardo to remember that their strikers cannot appear to be in an aggressive posture, while Splinter is simultaneously engaged in peace talks over in Japan. Obviously, he doesn't want to jeopardize any good faith he may have with Hiroto. But who are these strikers? It seems the strikers he is talking about are the purple dragons, as we see some of the tattoos on them. Also, later on, we get some dialogue that they're associated with Casey Jones somehow. I get the impression that they are working alongside the Turtles as security, protecting the perimeter of where they're at. In later scenes, you can see them standing alongside the Turtles as the Foot begin their assault on the Turtles' location. An interesting alliance if I am seeing this correctly, and I'm sure there's some sort of backstory. I wonder if we'll ever visit it. Nevertheless, the Foot begin to swarm the building. During the attack, Casey tells Mikey to get his wife and the Fugitoid to the safe room. So as we learned in issue number 2, Casey and April got engaged. Does look like sometime after Raphael's death, they did end up tying the knot. Now, the Foot keep coming through windows, breaking walls. This is when Leonardo realizes some of these Foot aren't human. Casey goes down to test this theory, but gets blasted across the room by one of these machines, which then he calls Terminators. During this sequence, we do get a couple nods to the 1990 movie. Casey does do the Classes Pain 101, your instructor is Casey Jones line. Then we get a reference to cricket, both cool references that were cool to see. Now, just as the Fugitoid and April make it to the safe room, they are also knocked by a blast. April indicates that the Fugitoid is not in good shape after this. Some of his limbs appear to have been blasted off. Also, now there's debris blocking the door's ability to close the safe room. All hope seems lost now as a bloody Casey looks over to Leo and asks what's the plan. Leo is speechless as he sees a massive swarm of Mouser drones enter the building as well alongside the robot Foot fleet. Now, from what I can tell, it's not clear what happened to some of the purple dragons that were helping, but we do hear April say later on that a couple of Casey's strike team who weren't killed were the ones that recovered Fugitoid's head, so I'm assuming some survived. Anyways, in this scene, it's just the Turtles, Casey, April, and Fugitoid, and they are being surrounded. Leo tells Mikey that he and Casey will hold them off, that Mikey needs to get everyone clear and get word to Splinter as soon as their communications get back online. Mikey knows what will happen if he leaves. He doesn't want to go and leave Leo and Casey behind. At this point, Fugitoid yells out no and then starts communicating with Baxter. He tells Baxter he knows it's him that Baxter wants and that Fugitoid will self-destruct himself before he lets Baxter hurt his friends or imprison him again. Yet another interesting detail, by the way, of the past of this new Turtles universe. Something happened in the past here between Fugitoid and Baxter. There has been speculation of prequels after this series is over, by the way. Just want to throw that out there, again, in case you maybe missed that. Now, Baxter is unfazed about what Fugitoid says. All he replies with is, "If I can't have you, nobody will." And all of a sudden, all the Mousers start beeping. And then, boom, a massive explosion destroys the building, killing Leonardo and Casey, who were face to face with these things. We find out a little bit more about what happened after the smoke cleared. This done in Kevin Eastman's art style, by the way, co-creator of the Ninja Turtles, for those who may be casually stumbling across this video. I love seeing his panels, by the way. I feel like I'm reading the old comics when I'm looking at them. Anyways, eventually a rescue team showed up and pulled April out of the rubble and took her to the hospital. She woke up a week later to find out that she had lost her arm and her leg. Also, she found out she was pregnant with Casey Marie. So meanwhile, through her pregnancy, the physical and mental therapy out in New York City, with the Turtles team mostly gone now, Hiroto and the Foot took over New York. And eventually, when April got out of the hospital, had Casey Marie, they went down into the sewers to live in the den as things started to get really bad in the city. Now, also after the blast, Mikey says he got blasted across the neighborhood in the explosion, and that as soon as he came to, he went to the lair immediately to try to contact Donatello with no luck. But confused and desperate, he stowed away on a plane to Japan to go look for Don and Splinter. I believe we're going to get a look at Michelangelo in Japan in the next issue. Now, back in the present, there's a couple different things going on. Casey Marie hits the streets and chaos is ensuing, since now there's martial law. She finds her crew, but she says something about getting word out to the others. No clue who she's talking about here, maybe familiar characters that we'll soon see, who knows. But just from the sounds of it, there's at least seems to be different factions of this crew out there. Probably what April refers to as the Resistance. Anyways, the Foot start rolling through with armored trucks. Things keep getting nuts, so Casey Marie tells her crew to use the tunnels and meet up in the lair in an hour. On her way home, she looks up at a sign that says Bleecker Street, and she says, "Whoa." In the 1990 movie, that's the street April lives on, by the way. It's probably the same here, and she's realizing she's passing her mom's old place.
Are you guys sure you know where you're going?
11th and Bleecker? Nope, this is only 9th Street.
Now, also around this time when all this chaos is happening, Hiroto can be seen looking down at everyone, talking to himself. It's a bit strange. He's barefoot, he's only wearing pants and some type of hooded cloak. It looks like he's standing on some type of a massive structure, kind of hard to tell if it's a building or something else. He starts going off a bit, talking about that he's everyone's god, that he could crush everyone if he wanted to with a single word, that everyone down there is pathetic. But then he starts breaking down emotionally as he realizes he has all this power, but that he's all alone, that his mother left him. The loss of his mother at such an early age and then being raised by the Foot seems to have done a number on him. He's almost becoming somewhat of a tragic style villain, it would seem. He says mother left me in charge of an empire, and before that as a small boy, your only son. Then he just starts repeating why and throws himself off this high-rise structure, almost like he's trying to end it all. As he's falling, he says, "From your failure, I will rise." And then these two giant mechanical hands or claws catch him, but you don't see where they're coming from. They come from off frame. Then Hiroto says, "I will never again be forgotten, abandoned. My angels will not allow it." So we'll see what that's about later on in future issues. Now, after all this, we see that back in the lair, April is taking samples of Mikey's blood. She says she needs to see what his advanced mutation is doing to his body. For those who don't know, in the first issue, Mikey fell off a tower and the fall from that height should have killed him. But as he's aged, his mutation appears to be changing, allowing him to survive such a fall and heal extremely quick. I can't help but think this is going to play a larger part in the end of the story somehow, but I still don't yet know what it means exactly. Mikey and April start talking about Fugitoid towards the tail end of the issue. Mikey asks if he's still in there. April says she doesn't know, but that she thinks so, but has been too scared to turn him on, as this would send out a "come kill us" signal to the bad guys. If you remember from issue 1, Hiroto used Stockman technology, so she's probably right. Now, whether Baxter is still alive, he did look kinda old already in the flashbacks, who knows how old he is in the present. Regardless, we still haven't seen him yet in current day, although I have a feeling he's still around, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's some sort of like artificial intelligence or cyborg at this point. Now, April tells Mikey she thinks she may know how to defeat Hiroto, and Mikey kinda breaks down the plan for us here at the end, although he doesn't seem convinced it will work, that there are too many variables. By the looks of it, the plan will be to get to Stockman's headquarters, which by the looks of things in issue number 4 synopsis, this headquarters is located on an island. That's going to be interesting to see. Anyways, they need to attack that and shut it down before they can go after Hiroto, but that their only shot is to activate Fugitoid during the attack, and if he wakes up, maybe he can knock out Stockman's tech. Now, with the plan being such a long shot and filled with a bunch of what ifs, this causes tension between Casey Marie and Mikey, but April yells at them both and tells Mikey she has something to show him. She explains to him that she's run enough schematics on Fugitoid to know he's still functional. Then she shows him something she's been working on, and it's a massive battle tank inside of a garage. And you can also see a bunch of other vehicles in the background. One that kind of looks like a hybrid of their 1990 movie van and the party wagon. But that's where the story is to be continued. So as we saw in one of the teaser images for Blood and Snow, in the present, April asks Mikey what happened to Splinter and Donatello. And this is where we jump back. And at first it starts us off in a flashback in Kevin Eastman's art style. And it's of Mikey getting off of a plane. And based off an old map Splinter had lying around, he goes in search of Clan Hamato. Through the countryside and over some snow-covered mountains, he eventually reaches what looks like a remote village and is quickly surrounded by samurai guards. The real deal, as he describes it. Michelangelo was then taken to one of the elders there, Master Shinichiro of Clan Hamato. Mikey explained who he was and asked for Splinter and Donatello, but the elder appeared saddened and not wanting to look at Michelangelo in the eye. This part was very sad. You knew what was coming next, and Mikey's face in this part also gives the same feeling, like he knew he was about to receive some horrible news. And it's at this point that the comic jumps into an even further flashback in Ben Bishop's art style, and this was the part I was talking about earlier in the non-spoiler section, probably my favorite sequence of the entire entire series. It starts off with Donatello and Splinter arriving in the same village in the middle of the night. They are greeted by Master Shinichiro. They discuss the upcoming peace talks with the Foot Clan, and Splinter says he's cautiously optimistic. Little does he know, Leonardo and Casey have been killed back home. If you remember, Donatello and Splinter had to turn off their radio communications to not be detected as they flew over to Japan. Donatello even asks Splinter in this part if he can go radio Leonardo. Splinter says go ahead, but one can assume Donatello doesn't get a response from the other end. Well, looks like the following morning, Splinter and Donatello, and some of Clan Hamato's guards, arrive at the meeting place, a local cemetery. The vibe isn't right, something is off. It seems like a weird place to meet for peace talks. Some representatives of the Foot Clan are there, including Ambassador Hara, but Oroku Hiroto is not there. This display of bad faith upsets Splinter. You can see that Hara starts to get nervous as Splinter starts to see what's going on. Suddenly, Hiroto arrives on horseback wearing what looks like some old school Shredder armor. I thought this part looked super cool, and there's even a cover that they revealed that has this on the front. Probably safe to say that's gonna sell out fast. First, he insults Splinter and asks if he's heard from his family in New York, insinuating he killed them, which he did with Baxter Stockman's help. This pisses off Splinter, and he immediately decapitates the Foot representatives in one fell swoop. This part was so badass. Anyways, a battle begins, and you can hear Splinter tell Donatello, "No mercy, my son." The two start taking out foot soldiers. Splinter flies through the air, slicing soldiers as he goes. Donatello can be seen impaling a foot soldier in the face with his bow staff. The two are visibly in rage about the loss of their family. Hiroto, upset that his forces are being defeated, as they do have the numbers, just not the discipline, calls in his archers. During this part, Hiroto tricks Splinter by taunting him, saying everyone you have known and loved is gone, all dead. Splinter, blinded by anger, stays on the battlefield, yelling at Hiroto to face him like a true warrior. Donatello can be seen in the background begging his father to retreat and regroup. As the archers are approaching, Splinter charges towards Hiroto, but Hiroto orders the archers to fire, and just before the arrows begin to strike, Splinter launches his sword towards Hiroto, stabbing him in the shoulder. Splinter yells, "For my family," as he does this, but it's not enough, as he and Donatello, who runs over to try to shield his father, begin to get struck by the assault. You can hear Donatello in his final moments trying to protect his father, yelling, "Father, get behind me," as the arrows begin to hit him. Splinter cries out, "My son," as he also starts to get hit, and the two are killed. As you can see in the next page, that the Hamato clan are visibly upset, looking at their arrow-covered bodies that lie dead on the ground. Hiroto retreats as the Hamato clan archers then arrive, a little too late though. After this, it jumps back to the Eastman-style flashback of Michelangelo listening to the story. He is shown the ashes of his brother and his father as they have been cremated, and is given their personal belongings. He is offered a spot in the Hamato clan, but he respectfully rejects the offer and goes off into the mountains, where, as we saw in the issue 2 flashbacks, he becomes the last Ronin. Now, as for the present, there was some interesting reveals that go on here, one in particular, which we'll get to in a second. So it starts off as we see that Casey Marie is training, and Michelangelo is secretly watching, while talking to the ghosts of his dead brothers. They all are impressed at what they are seeing, and believe that with some real training, she might have something. Mikey tests to see if she's willing to learn, as Mikey teases her and tells her to show him what she's got, to come at him as hard as she can. At first, there's some hesitation, but Mikey insults her some more, and so she does. This is where we kind of got a glimpse of the old Michelangelo, as he toys with her, making funny remarks as they go along. Reminded me of the 2003 Michelangelo a little bit, when he would tease Raphael. Anyways, he tells her she's practically family, and that he wouldn't mind teaching her as long as she could follow directions. Never really having a mentor, she loves the idea and hugs Michelangelo as she calls him sensei. We see that April overheard the whole thing, and this is where we get a pretty big revelation. After Casey leaves and Mikey is talking to April, Mikey asks April, "When were you going to tell me about Casey Marie's extra abilities?" So that's big news. She's not a normal human. And now some of the stuff that the staff have talked about makes a little bit more sense too. If you remember, a while back there was an article of them discussing the idea for potential prequels and sequels to this story. The prequel part made sense. That'd be cool to see what adventures these turtles went on. Their universe is pretty dark, so just the thought of that and all the different villains that they could face in this environment is a pretty cool idea. And now the sequels make sense with this Casey Marie reveal. The way I'm thinking about it is, if it does happen, it's almost going to be an adventures of the last Ronin and Casey Marie. It'd be cool if they called her Shadow. At least that's what it's starting to look like. Let's see if they move forward with that. Now, April says she thinks trace amounts of Nichigen DNA were passed on from her birth parents, so April and Casey Jones, who had a lifelong exposure to it from the company they kept, Splinter and the Turtles. So it seems, at least from what April's saying, that the turtles, at least throughout their whole life, were radiating something, at least on very low levels, which caused this. April says about Casey Marie that she's basically normal in all aspects, except other than strength, speed, and her healing abilities, all of which have increased with age. She also says that Casey Marie is aware that she's different, but that they haven't told her why yet, but that they will soon, and to keep it a secret for now. Next we get a scene of everybody in a war room getting ready for the attack on Baxter Stockman's island. It kind of reminded me of those scenes from the old Star Wars movies of them planning to launch an attack on the Death Star. They are going over the plans of taking down Baxter Stockman's facility. This part's kind of funny because they're cutting between the plans being discussed and them actually fulfilling them out on the battlefield. And on the battlefield, things aren't going as planned. And Michelangelo can even be heard saying this was a bad plan as he cleans up everyone's messes. Baxter can be seen inside receiving an alert about the attack. Stockman looks like he's been through stuff over the years. He is now part man and part machine. First he thinks it's just a bunch of punks trying to steal some equipment and doesn't take it very seriously and just sends out some of his guards. You even see Hiroto get alerted of the situation. He says to send out a squad over to Stockman's facility. Once Baxter eventually sees that it's a little bit more serious than just some people trying to steal some equipment, he sends out a swarm of mousers, which are taken down by an EMP. When April arrives in a big turtle tank, they make their way into the facility and April takes Fugitoid's head with her and connects it into Baxter Stockman's systems. This next part was pretty emotional. Baxter sees Fugitoid is there and confronts April, who punches him as she says this was for my husband. Baxter smacks her to the ground and goes to grab Fugitoid, who is now powered on. Fugitoid says, "You shall not pass." Lord of the Rings reference, pretty nice. Anyways, he says it again and starts electrocuting Baxter, and then his next line was a bit heart-wrenching. He says, "You shall pay for my family, for my friends, for everything," talking about Splinter and the Turtles. Next we see a big explosion as Baxter disintegrates alongside Fugitoid's head. April says, "Goodbye, Honeycutt, thank you," and we see this nanobite swarm from the explosion start entering Baxter's systems, powering them all down. April says Honeycutt, Fugitoid, is now in control, and we see Hiroto's defenses are shutting down all over the city. We even see robot foot soldiers start falling down in the streets and civilians start smashing them, yelling Hiroto's next. Hiroto can then be seen commanding a full tactical alert, getting everyone with a weapon to his tower to protect them. The Ronin, April, and Casey Marie can then be seen standing on some rubble looking at the city. Casey says, "I think we won." April says, "Yeah, the battle, not the war." And Mikey says, "And not at a price I'm willing to pay anymore," as we see soldiers from their side picking each other up and limping away. And that's where the chapter ends. The book starts off just like the 5-page preview that we got a few days ago. Michelangelo is sitting in Master Splinter's old room and he's looking at Master Splinter's old book while talking to the ghost of his dead brothers. They have a heated debate about why Michelangelo hasn't attacked Hiroto already, considering all the defenses are down, since in the last issue they took down Baxter Stockman's facility, which was pretty much powering all of Hiroto's defenses. So yeah, now all of Hiroto's defenses are down and the ghosts are pretty much telling him like, it's time to go, let's go with a full frontal assault, on Hiroto. Now like I said, this argument starts getting kind of heated and the voices of his brothers start getting to Mikey, and he pretty much tells him like, I know what I gotta do, and tells them to go away, like for good. And they do, and now Michelangelo's all alone. We don't see him talk to the spirits anymore after this. We just see that he's now suited up in his last Ronin gear and he heads out. It then cuts to just chaos in the streets, because now that Hiroto's synthetic foot soldiers are down because Baxter Stockman's technology is all down, there's just chaos in the streets. Casey Marie and her crew are trying to keep some type of order, but they're clearly outnumbered by the citizens of the city. And this is when we see Casey Marie get a message that a power outage is causing flooding in the sewers. And worried about April, her mom, who lives down there in the Turtles' old home, she turns her focus to going and helping her. Now while all this is going on, we see Oroko Hiroto freaking out in his headquarters. He's yelling at all of his human foot soldiers to get Stockman's technology back online, and we even see him asking them to bring his armor. So we knew he was gonna suit up some way in this final issue, and the way he does it is actually a little bit different than how I was thinking, so we'll talk about that when we get to that part. But here in this scene, we see him say, "I'm going to hunt and kill a mutant," talking about Michelangelo. And just as we hear him say this, we see Michelangelo standing outside of his facility getting ready to go in. Now at this point in the story, it jumps back over to Casey Marie, who has made it back to the old turtle lair. You could see that the waters are starting to rise in there, and she starts calling out to her mom, who she eventually finds but is dead down trying to fix the water pumps there, but it's not working as she's neglected it for too long, as she explains. This is when Casey Marie finds out from her mom that Mikey has went off on his own, and this upsets Casey Marie as she wanted to be there, as Mikey is now her sensei at this point, and she ends up smashing one of the walls to their home out of anger. April tells her, be careful, you're going to hurt yourself, and this is when Casey Marie and her start having an argument as Casey Marie starts saying, will I hurt myself? She knows she's a mutant now. She's always known, but now it's all starting to come out. She's got super strength, super speed, and so yeah, now she knows about everything. Then they start arguing about Casey going out to go help Mikey. April's trying to get her to stay, but Casey says she's in this fight to the end as she heads out. The story then cuts back over to Michelangelo, who is starting to infiltrate Hiroto's facility. He plants a bunch of bombs everywhere. They all start going off at the same time. And from here on out, it's pretty much non-stop action. You start seeing trails of dead foot soldiers as Mikey is slicing through them with ease. You hear Michelangelo explain that they've gone soft over the years, relying too much on the synthetic foot soldiers that they had. Now, after Mikey gets through all these foot soldiers, we see that he gets to this massive door with a giant guard standing in front of it holding this massive Elden Ring type sword. To put it in video game terms, this is Mikey's first boss that he has to face. I don't know if this guy was genetically engineered, but he's huge. And so Mikey ends up using a bunch of flashbangs to blind him and then stabs him in the neck with Leonardo's sword, which I thought was pretty legit. But Mikey does get past this guard pretty easily, all things considered. And then he starts getting swarmed by a bunch of crows, which if you've been following the previous issues, Hiroto always has crows around him. We even saw one in one of the previous issues eating the eyeballs out of the head of one of Hiroto's generals that failed him. Mikey is pretty suspicious of these crows though, as they all seem very coordinated in their attack. Very soon Mikey realizes that they are also synthetic robots. He does explain though that it must be part of a separate control system from Stockman's, and that's how they're still up. So right there you start to realize that Hiroto may have some other toys to use against Michelangelo. Michelangelo generates an EMP with his tongue fuzz like he did in the first issue, pretty much breaking all of the crows. And just as he does this, a giant arm comes in from out of frame and swats Michelangelo away. I'm guessing this is one of those giant arms that we saw in one of the previous issues that caught Hiroto as he jumped off of a building. We see that the arm belongs to the next boss that Michelangelo has to get past, and it's this giant robot type thing with wings. It kind of looks a little bit like Devil Shredder from the old TMNT anime from back in the 90s. This thing starts knocking Michelangelo all over the room. You can see it has crazy strength as it's breaking concrete on the floor. Mikey even says at one point, another hit and I'm dead, and says he needs to find something big to finish this thing. That's when he sees the sword of the first boss that he was fighting, that giant sword he was carrying, and he uses that and stabs it through the torso of this winged robot monster. As soon as he's done, he calls out Hiroto, who is up a metal staircase and is standing on the other side of his mother, who is in that cryogenic tube thing. I don't know if it's just my imagination, but I kind of got some Empire Strikes Back vibes here that sort of remind me of when Luke and Vader are in that room talking to each other before they start fighting. And yeah, the two are just pretty much talking crap to each other. Mikey tells him the last of the Uroku bloodline ends tonight. And then he says, and your mother, who's laying there. Then Hiroto tells him, says the worthless Ronin who couldn't save his own master. And then Michelangelo tells him, and now your family will die. But then out of left field, Hiroto smashes the cryogenic tube his mother's in, stabbing her with the claws of this new suit, by the way, which we'll talk about in a second. But yeah, he says, in truth, I've always hated her. She left me as a child and never returned. I only kept her alive out of spite, lost and alone in her coffin while I conquered. Michelangelo's just watching all this happen, and he's just giving a face of disgust as he says, at least she had honor. You ready? And Hiroto tells him, well, I certainly didn't get all dressed up for no reason. And he's talking about his armor, so let's talk about it for a little bit. There's a lot to go over. When it comes to the design of it, he has that little trident thing that the Shredder helmet usually has in the front. And like I mentioned before, he has the two claws coming out of his knuckle area. Again, also very reminiscent of the Shredder armor, except he seems to be able to retract them on command. But as for the rest of the suit, it appears to be some type of nanotechnology, and it kind of looks like liquid metal, almost like the T-1000 from Terminator. He seems to be able to shift it around because at first when he's talking to Michelangelo, the face part is revealed, like you can actually see his face. But then when they're about to start fighting, the mask closes up, almost like Spider-Man's face mask in the new movies. And that's when you get a design on the face that's with red eyes, and it's almost like this Casey Jones kind of pattern in the mouth area. Like it looks a little bit like the lines in the hockey mask. So this is when the two leap towards each other and the fight begins. The building has caught fire around this point, and during their fight there is an explosion and the two get launched out of the building and start sliding down the side of it, which is at an incline. The two fight as they're falling down, and as they're hitting things on their way down, you start to realize that Hiroto is taking no damage due to the protection of his suit, while Michelangelo, on the other hand, is starting to get dinged up. Mikey realizes this, and he knows this can't go on forever, so he points out that he needs to find a weak spot in the armor. This is when it cuts back to Casey Marie, who now is getting closer and sees the explosion, and just as she's about to head towards it, one of her crew tells her it's too late for that they have to get back to April to help her find a way to stop the flooding as it's getting worse, and that it could kill a lot of people who live down there. Then it cuts back to Mikey and Hiroto, who are still fighting as they're falling, although now they appear to be more in a free fall and end up landing on a water tower that's on top of another building. This is when Mikey notices that the liquid metal armor that Hiroto is using exposes his body underneath when he takes severe impacts, although the liquid metal heals itself very quickly. But this gives Michelangelo an idea: hit the armor hard enough and take advantage of those openings, although those openings are too far and few in between, and you can see at this point that Michelangelo is starting to bleed. Their fight continues and Michelangelo starts to slow down. This is when he comes up with the idea of putting a sticky grenade in Hiroto's hand, which when it explodes, it creates one of those openings, and this is when he stabs Hiroto through the hand with one of Raphael's sai, even saying a gift from Raphael. Hiroto pulls out the sai, and we see the liquid metal cover his hand up again. Hiroto then becomes distracted as just behind them, his tower completely explodes. Mikey takes advantage of this and knocks him off the building, where Hiroto crashes down to the concrete below, again creating another opening, this time in Hiroto's torso. Michelangelo sees this and proceeds to drive Leonardo's katana through Hiroto's stomach and then kicks it in further. Now, while all this is going on, Casey Marie sees that the flooding has gotten worse, and she's now looking for her mom, who she finds underwater still trying to fix the pumps. April's wearing some type of oxygen tank. Now back up above, Hiroto tells Michelangelo, "Fine, I yield, you win." Michelangelo ain't having it though. He picks up a manhole cover and is about to slam it on Hiroto, although Hiroto takes advantage as Michelangelo is talking to him and swipes at Michelangelo, giving him a pretty bad gash in his midsection. Now Michelangelo's bleeding out even worse, and Hiroto starts to charge towards him. This is when Michelangelo chucks Donatello's bow at Hiroto's face to serve as a distraction, as Michelangelo ends up jumping down into the sewers. Down here, Michelangelo hides for a little bit as he tries to stop the bleeding from the cut he just received. Hiroto then proceeds to jump down into the sewers as well, calling him out. This is when we got one of the cooler parts of this final issue. Michelangelo, now having used the sai, the katana, and the bow staff against Hiroto, is only left with his nunchucks, and so he jumps out of the shadows and just starts beating the crap out of Hiroto with them, which was pretty cool to see. We haven't really seen him just use those weapons like he used to do, and you can tell he fights a lot better with them, which I thought was a nice touch. Michelangelo actually gets the upper hand here, and it looks like he's about to finish Hiroto, when all of a sudden at the same time, Casey Marie and April are able to fix the pumps, and this releases a lot of water into the area of the sewers that Michelangelo and Hiroto are fighting, and so they get washed away through drains and end up outside of the city walls. This is when April tells Casey Marie that when Michelangelo had first come back, when she was drawing blood from him to do labs, that she actually implanted a tracker inside of him, and so she gives Casey Marie a radio to go track Mikey. Now, just outside the city walls in the Muddy River, where the story first started actually in issue number 1, so it's kind of cool that this is ending where it began. We see that Hiroto and Michelangelo are starting to get up and continue their fight. You can see that most of the liquid metal on Hiroto's armor is no longer there, but at the same time, Michelangelo's bleeding out, so both are vulnerable. Michelangelo even explains that his head is spinning, his guts leaking, and that he can barely stand, that this whole thing has been a one-way ticket. At this point, I think he realizes he's dying, and so he starts going all out on Hiroto, beating him with multiple punches. Mikey tells him that he's gonna bury him there in that mud hole, alone outside of the city that he tried to destroy. And just as he's about to kill him, Hiroto says, "No, you're wrong. I am God, immortal." And then he grabs something on his chest, which creates this like electric field around them. You could see that it's hurting Michelangelo, and Hiroto is just laughing. Although since he doesn't have his liquid metal suit completely covering him, I think it's killing him too. And then all of a sudden there's a loud boom, and the mud around him splashes up, When everything settles, you see Hiroto, presumably dead, face down in the mud. Michelangelo can be seen crawling out of the mud barely, and then he rolls over to his back as he begins to die. Just as this is happening, Casey Marie can be seen jumping out of one of the drains and runs over to Michelangelo and sees that he's dying. She tells him it's not fair, that he promised her that he was going to teach her everything in Splinter's book. Michelangelo apologizes to her, telling her it was his duty, his destiny for his family, but then Casey Marie tells him that she's his family. Mikey tells her that Splinter's journal is now hers and that it'll teach her everything she needs to know, but that the last lesson in it is his, and it's the most important of all, to know peace. This is when April can be seen arriving, and she runs up to see what's going on. She tells him goodbye, sweet friend, and then Michelangelo dies. The next part's probably the part that got everybody crying. If you've seen people talking about this online, it really pulls on your heartstrings. You hear a voice saying, "Mikey, wake up already, geez," and you see Michelangelo's waking up in a bed, and Raphael, Donatello, and Leonardo are there waking him up. They're all young again, and this appears to be them in the afterlife, or maybe it's a memory Michelangelo's having as he's dying, but either way, it's really sad. They're telling him to get up and get his lazy butt moving, that they're gonna go out for some fresh air and some training. We then see them all running through the sewers and then across rooftops, and they all have a head start on Mikey, so Mikey's kind of lagging behind. It was really nice seeing all four turtles again, being happy like this. They end up on a rooftop overlooking the city, and they're all talking smack to each other. Raphael says, "So much for fresh air, it smells like Mikey cut the cheese." And this is when we see Casey Jones land right behind them and say, "Whoever smelt it dealt it." Then you hear a voice come from off frame and say, "Well, I cannot speak to Raphael's flatulence, but New York City indeed has its own unique odor." And then we see Michelangelo say, "Father," and then you see Splinter standing there. Then it zooms out and we see all four turtles, Casey and Splinter, standing together, and Michelangelo says, "Yeah, it does. Smells like home." And that's where it says the end. That's the end of the Ronin story. That last part there, definitely got choked up on that part when we were reading it. Super heartfelt and emotional scene. It's just wild to think that it's over now. Now let's talk about the epilogue, because I feel like this is the part people are going to be talking about for the next few weeks. This and that last scene I just talked about, I feel like they're the two big moments. So the epilogue starts off with Casey Marie back at the lair, and she's training. Just as she finishes her workout, you see her walk over to Master Splinter's book, which is open on a certain page. You can't really see what's on it, and she just ends up closing it. She says, "I wish you were still here to see how far I've come." So I'm assuming some time has passed now. Anyway, she says, "But I'll continue to keep training, keep learning. I'll keep getting better, sensei." Then we see that she gets dressed in her regular clothes and goes to visit her mom. April seems to be working on something. You can't really see what it is. You see Casey Marie ask her how the tests are looking. April says that there's been little improvements, but that there's a lot more to get done. Then she asks, "So what are we eating today?" April says she's not hungry, and Casey says, "I'm not talking to you." And then she says, "Hey there." And that's when it cuts to her looking at this glass biodome sphere thing, and inside of it are four baby turtles. You can see that one has a spiky shell and that the rest of them just have regular shells. And if you look closely in the background, you can see a TCRI ooze canister that seems to be hooked up to a machine with a bunch of tubes going into this biosphere thing. It does appear that in this universe, there's gonna be 4 new Ninja Turtles that we've never heard of before. The crew and stuff that have worked on these books have mentioned in the past potentials for sequels and prequels to this last Ronin story. I would imagine this is the setup for the sequels, although there hasn't been any announcement that I've seen, but it does say to be continued in the bottom corner of this page. I wonder. Make sure to click up above and check out my latest video on the sequel to The Last Ronin, where yes, those 4 baby turtles we just saw here at the end are now toddlers, and we found out their names. Check it out by clicking up above. You don't want to miss it.